Hi, this is Anita Tijerina Revilla. I am an associate professor at UNLV. I've been here about 12 years, and I am the director of Gender and Sexuality Studies. And something that we teach about a lot in our program is this concept of intersectionality. It's a concept that has pretty much gone viral, I guess. A lot of people talk about it in social networks and especially in popular websites related to feminism. So it's pretty important on the popular level, but it's a term that originated in academia, and I'm going to spend some time describing it. So these are a few definitions that I've come up with myself. Intersectionality is when all of the social categories that we are assigned at birth have a historical and contemporary significance that impact our lives today. Intersectionality is also a concept that recognizes that race, class, gender, sexuality, ability, nation, religion, etc., all of those intersect and overlap to create socio-political legal privilege in some instances and oppression in the others. And so I know that that's a little bit hard to understand on a theoretical level. So what I like to do is use a visual to illustrate this a little bit differently. So what you'll see when you see this diagram of intersectionality that we've created is you have an intersection at the center. At the center, that would be the individual, that would be the human being, that would be you, that would be me, and each person is made up of different social categories. You know, we're assigned these categories at birth, and or as we grow older, we understand them to be part of our identities. So one of those in particular is race or ethnicity. Another is gender. Another is class, and another is sexuality. Those are the primary ones that people think about. In fact, the class that we teach for our department is race, class, and gender. But in fact, it's much more than just those. We are all of these social categories intersect to create both either a privileged experience or an oppressed experience at a structural level. And beyond those, we also have ones like language, culture, citizenship, mental and physical health, religion and spirituality. And these are the social categories that most impact our lives, whether we are conscious of them or not. And yet, we also have all of these outside forces that impact the intersection. So, for example, our family, the history of this country, the history of the world, and its impact on those categories, education, religion, economy, law, your numerical representation within a wider society, healthcare, and political power. All of those things, quote, intersect to create your personal experience. And depending on who you are and how your social category is identified, then your experience within this intersection and within society shifts. Another way to think about this is in terms of struggle or challenge. So when I use the word oppression, a lot of people don't realize that oppression is not simply having a bad experience or having an individual struggle. When we talk about struggle, especially in women's studies or in gender and sexuality studies, we're really talking about structural, institutional, and organizational struggle. And so I have another visual that I've identified as multidimensional struggle. Again, we have people who sometimes think about themselves as social justice advocates, right? They want to end discrimination. And they might say, well, I'm very much against racism, but yet they are very active sexists, or they're very active ageist, or they're very active discriminators against LGBT people, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender people, which we call heterosexism or homophobia. So if you take a look at this diagram that we've put together, it's called multidimensional struggle, and I indicate several categories on this diagram, but there are very few of these that people actually take into consideration, even if they are social justice advocates. Generally, you have people who will look at racism, sexism, sometimes they'll look at classism, but they won't necessarily look at nativism or citizenism, for example. Citizenism is a term that I created with a student of mine to talk about specifically the discrimination that immigrants and or people who are not born citizens into any nation are discriminated upon. They're treated as substandard human beings in a society merely because they weren't born in that nation. Similarly, some people don't think about body discrimination. So if you're one of those people, for example, who has lunch and then immediately starts to say negative things about your body, like, oh, I feel fat, I look ugly, or how could I have eaten that much food? That's an act of body discrimination. Usually, we're engaged in that kind of discrimination on an individual basis, but it's also something that we've received from a structural message and from a structural perspective in terms of what we call a beauty standard or a body image that is ideal. That ideal is socially constructed, meaning that our society has created it, they have deemed it as good or bad, and so all of us fit in one way into the privileged body standard or beauty standard or the marginalized slash oppressed body beauty standard. And so when you think about the word fatism, it's the way in which people actively discriminate against people who are deemed fat or not fitting perfectly into the beauty standard. And if you look again at this diagram, you'll see stuff like ageism. We have both discrimination against young people and older people. We have mental illness discrimination, and that's what some people call an invisible illness. Whereas, for example, you might have a clinically depressed diagnosis and illness, but you will not be necessarily protected against discrimination for your illness because people don't recognize it or don't see it visibly. You also have things like colorism, where within especially people of color communities, you have people discriminating based on skin color. The lighter you are, the more Eurocentric your skin is resembled. Even your color, the color of your eyes, are seen as more favorable the closer they are to blue, to green, or not brown. That comes from a history of colonization that has taught us to basically value European beauty image over native or African beauty image, and or people who have African and Native American or indigenous origin. Their skin color tends to be darker, and again, that's something that's very active. Colorism is a very active way of discriminating against people even within that same group. And generally, one of the things that people think about or don't think about in terms of discrimination is this idea of xenophobia, just the general fear of the unknown. And this is my definition of multidimensional struggle. It's just something that I put together, trying to identify this as a theoretical concept. Multidimensional struggle is a concept that indicates that human beings often engage in and experience a variety of struggles depending on their various socio-political identities, including but not limited to racism, colorism, classism, imperialism, sexism, patriarchy, homophobia, transphobia, heterosexism, ageism, ableism, and many more. And Kimberly Crenshaw is a law professor and legal scholar who is credited with coining the concept of intersectionality. In a legal court case, the discriminated person, for example, has the burden of proof. So if a black woman wants to allege discrimination, she has to pick one ism. She can't pick racism and sexism. She must pick one in order to prove that she's been discriminated upon. And what Kimberly Crenshaw argued is that if you're a black woman, you cannot separate your race from your gender. And if you're experiencing discrimination, those two aspects of your identity coexist, and therefore, in a legal court case, should be argued together. So again, for example, she says that a black woman may allege that she is being discriminated upon as both a woman and black, but if white women and black men have not been discriminated upon, then that's the victim of discrimination will have the difficulty of proving sexism and or racism against herself as a black woman. And again, what Kimberly Crenshaw pointed out is that that should not be the case.